Welcome to Future Ready with Bechtle, the podcast where we explore the technologies, ideas and strategies that are shaping tomorrow's workplace. Each episode we'll bring together thought leaders, innovators and industry experts from within Bechtle to discuss how organisations can adapt, grow and thrive in a world defined by constant change. From AI to cloud, cybersecurity and sustainability and on to the modern workplace, we'll help you cut through the noise and get future ready. So welcome to Future Ready with Bechtle. I'm Steve Harley, Field CTO. I'm here today with Stuart from Qolcom, our sister company. Stuart, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'm currently CTO at Qolcom. As Steve said, recently acquired by Bechtle, networking specialist, but here today to talk about something a bit different.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about IoT. So what do we mean by IoT, first of all?
IoT is a really broad subject, so it can be anything from that smart speaker you've got connected at home to a CCTV camera. What we're talking about specifically today, and has become a particular area of interest with Qolcom and its customers, is IoT for monitoring the environment. So anything from a temperature monitor, a humidity monitor, monitoring energy usage, any of those devices that you might deploy to monitor those things. And that's, they're just as important as the other types of IoT. They still need to be identified, connected, secured. The data still needs to be have integrity, and we need to collect that data in some way. So they're just as important as any other part of the IoT platform.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you specifically, that environmental data capture that you were talking about there. What's driving that? Why environmental IoT?
So it's regulatory in parts. There are particular guidelines and advisories that are coming out from a lot of public bodies about what we should do when we're building new spaces for people to occupy. That might be, again, anything from energy usage monitoring to temperature, humidity and air quality. For instance, there's in the new building regulations, document F, which relates to airflow within a space, does specify that a non-domestic environment that's going to be occupied by multiple people must have the ability to be monitored. The air quality, the CO2 within that space must be monitored, and that relates to meeting rooms, classrooms, gym spaces, those types of spaces.
And so what's driven that? Is that a post-COVID thing, or we're talking about health and well-being of people?
I think from that perspective, I think a lot of it was driven by that time. But it's been very well documented that things like CO2, for instance, can severely affect productivity, concentration, those types of levels. So it's really important in areas like schools. So the Department for Education are really hot on this topic. They're advising all new build schools to monitor the CO2 to make sure they have good airflow within spaces. So productivity is massively affected when CO2 is too high. It's the equivalent of having a glass or two of wine in terms of productivity. But unfortunately, without the happy
without
side
the fun,
effects.
without the fun that comes with it.
Yeah.
I suppose that's really important because we talk about environmental IoT and capturing that data, and the big thing, I suppose, from a C-suite's perspective in a business was, what's the benefit, right? How do I get return on investment there? So what you're saying is productivity is a big driver of that.
Productivity is a driver, absolutely. Resource management is another driver. So if you can monitor how spaces are used and when they're used, keep that historic data, then you can obviously make better use of those resources. Making sure in schools and colleges that education spaces are 70% utilised, rather than going out and just by anecdotal data, maybe building new education spaces when you don't actually need to. You just need to use what you've got a bit better. Same goes for meeting rooms within the enterprise as well.
See, that's really interesting because earlier in the series we were speaking to Michael from the Bechtle Interiors team, and they were talking about designing workspaces so that you get the real benefit and they're utilised in the right way. What you're talking about here is an opportunity to make that data driven.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of monitors and sensors have been deployed in the past. In fact, when the Department of Education first made their recommendations, loads of people went out and bought very cheap CO2 monitors, sat them in the corner of the room and asked somebody to keep an eye on them. But that's not really helping you make any changes to the way you run your business or the way you run your operation. Having the data collected and stored for historical analysis is absolutely where it's at. We talk about building a digital twin of a building, so monitoring as much as you can to build a digital representation of the environment, how it's used, when it's used, and then that actually allows you to apply changes to that data, maybe even simulate what might happen if you change a certain aspect of the way you use that environment.
And that's really interesting, because then you make that digital twin, that living, breathing representation of your building, your manufacturing plant, whatever it may be.
Yes,
and you're
absolutely.
able then to kind of predict the impact of those changes and make sure you what's the word I'm looking for? Align those and optimize them to do it in the
And
right
if you
way.
can correlate data as well, so if you're also through this, through the same methods and standards, we deploy monitors for energy usage. You can actually look at how much energy usage goes up when you're using a space. Does it, can we be turning things off when we're not using a space? Seasonal variances, those types of things. So again, talked earlier about affecting the bottom line, reducing energy usage. Everyone is meant to have a carbon plan and an energy reduction plan. Everyone knows how much they spend on energy, but if we can break it down into smaller subsections by floor, by department, by circuit, they can really focus on the high energy users and make a plan based on that.
Yeah, so you can be really targeted when you're trying to pursue those ESG goals as well.
Yeah,
then, can't you?
absolutely.
That's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier to me before we were sat down here having this chat that the sensors are now integrated into kind of meeting bars and that kind of thing. What tell us a little bit more about that integration.
Yeah, and I think this is when we work with customers, they really don't know where to start sometimes. And what we expose to them is that they already have a lot of these capabilities in their environment. They might not know about it. So we can talk about, as you say, some of the AV systems. Certain manufacturer we work with called Neat, for instance, they have their sound bars and their Neat screens packed full of sensors that will measure CO2, will measure temperature, will measure humidity. But they're not exposing that, recording that for historical reference, and they're not exposing that on a dashboard. So we can extract that data for the customer. We can put that on a dashboard. We can combine that with other integrated systems. So that's just going to handle the meeting rooms. What do we do with the office space? What do we do with the comms rooms? And we can put all of that into one package by using multiple sensors, integrating with the network. HPE Aruba Networks have some fantastic IoT integrations that we can make use of.
It's really interesting, is it? People spoke a lot about smart buildings. We talk a lot about technology-driven interiors. Really, this is about making sure that you're making the investments in the right areas to capture that data, and that's as part of the sensors and the investment you're going to make anyway. If we're going to kit out a meeting room, if we pick the right technology, and then we can capture that data, and then we can make that virtuous loop, can't we?
Yes.
And that's got to be the real benefit, I should imagine, in that, when we ask that big question in the C-suite is what do we get out of this? Better understanding of the environment and better cost savings.
Better understanding. And if we can expose that data in a myriad of ways as well, yes, we can collect all the data for analysis at a later date, but we want to put that onto a dashboard. Dashboards for various use cases. So again, the dashboards and alerting systems for an IT worker who might want to know when an air conditioning unit has failed or a leak has occurred within the comms rooms, or a dashboard specifically for the estates manager who wants to look at room occupancy, for instance. So expose the data in the right ways, make that easily accessible for people, and then they can make their data-driven decisions off the back of that.
That's really interesting. There's a couple of things that just occurred to me when you're talking about that. The dashboards and exposing it, that gives people the opportunity potentially when you're talking about shared office spaces, perhaps about new business models. Because I know, like for example, Philips have a light as a service offering with lumens in those big public spaces. Is it a meeting room environment as a service? Being able to actually build that sort of stuff out and target, even if it's internal cross-billing.
Yes, exactly.
So that you can start to make departments own their carbon emissions, their energy costs as well, becomes really powerful.
Yeah, new business models are definitely being exposed by having the right data available to you. Yes.
And then, of course, that analysis piece, is that being driven at the moment, a lot by AI? Is machine learning helping identify those trends, or is it still very, very manual?
I think we're at a period of transition at the moment. I think that we've got very used to manual. What we need to be really careful of when we expose this data is that we're not adding unnecessary overhead to the customer of saying, well, here's a new dashboard to look at, and then we've got enough dashboards to look at. What do we actually do with the data? So yes, making sure that some of the alerting, for instance, that comes out of those systems is part of an agreed and understood workflow, can be really useful, because that can obviously improve productivity quite massively. If you're notifying a maintenance person that there's something that needs to be going and inspected ahead of a really big problem, that can help. But you're absolutely correct. The data, we need to lean into AI and do more with AI to actually make use of that data and analyze it properly.
I think that's a really interesting point, because we're talking about generating quite a lot of data here, and data, it does have weight, it does have mass, it has a cost to it associated. How do you control the costs in these scenarios? How do we make sure that this doesn't spiral?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, that goes back to making sure that we make the best use of the infrastructure the customer might already have, and make that point of entry into this world of IoT and data gathering as low cost as possible. The data side of it, we can manipulate the data in a number of ways. We can obviously send it to multiple places for analysis. We don't have to keep it all in one location. And again, we can lean on whatever systems that the customer may already have for doing that. They may already have their own sort of data store, their own data lakes, and we can push the data that way, as well as exposing it on any dashboard that we might provide as part of the service.
It's really interesting, because I know another area of offerings that Qolcom really lean into is that network as a service piece. So, having the right network to support that data capture becomes really important as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've been working for many years with HPE Aruba, and more recently with Juniper, now part of the same organization. And they do have some fantastic IoT integrations that have helped us to use energy harvesting, very low cost sensors. So very easy to deploy. Don't need to worry too much about an overhead of management on these things, because they just sit there using the environmental aspects around them, light and movement, to power themselves. And we can easily deploy those at a very low cost point. And that's really maximizing the investment that customer's already made in the network at that point. And then, as you say, offer that as part of the overall as a service for the network.
And is there a typical kind of customer size for this? Is there, does my building need to be of a certain scale to make this worthwhile? What sort of customers look at this at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of success in the education sector, and that's all the way from primary all the way to higher education. And as you know, that's a very different set of estates we're talking about there.
Very different.
So you can start quite small with 10 classrooms, and you build a really quick picture of how those classrooms are performing. And like I say, it's a low cost entry point as well. And that's really good. So a lot of customers start quite small. They might even deploy the sensors in 2 or 3 comms rooms, for instance, to measure their IT environment. And then once they see the sort of benefit in that, they'll expand out to a lot of other places. So it's really, it's one size fits all, but it's all sizes fits all, really, in this case.
I suppose it makes a lot of sense when we're talking about energy costs, particularly where that server room closet is probably the epicenter of
Yes.
of energy draw, other than maybe aircon, I should imagine.
Well, what we found with the energy consumption analysis is that actually, again, you can start at a macro level and start to drill down. So, like I said before, a customer might know how much they're spending. They don't know which areas of their site or campus might be spending. So let's start with the buildings. Let's put a sensor in for each building. Let's find out the buildings that use the most energy. Then we can focus on that building, look at the circuits. Then we can focus on the circuits and look at the devices. And that's the way to drill down and go, okay, they're the high energy users. Let's make a plan for them first.
Yeah, it makes a real sense. And I suppose it's just going back to that why Qolcom, why Bechtle in this story, the ability to kind of layer on from the network level to the delivery, the interior design piece that we're speaking, the data capture, IoT feeds into that sustainability. There's a real integrated story here of delivering value and making sure that these spaces are really optimized.
Yeah.
That's going to be why you'd engage with us, right?
Yeah, we have pillars, as you say, across all of those spaces. So integrating the IoT sensors as part of the furniture fit out, for instance, making sure that our modern workplace team are putting in the correct AV systems that we know we can extract data from, delivering the whole thing as an end-to-end service with help desk and support on the back end. We can do it end to end.
No, really, really, really powerful. Thank you very much for your time today, Stuart. It's been really, really insightful. If anybody wanted to kind of get in touch and to push this forwards, you engage their Bechtle account manager, their Qolcom account manager. The options are endless, really, aren't they?
Yeah. Wherever your touch point is, the organisation knows how to talk about this stuff. So yeah, just reach out.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thank you for listening. Please make sure to follow us on whatever platform you prefer, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.